for joining us. Hello, everybody. We'd like to go ahead and get started because we have a tight schedule today. We will be recording the event, and you can also find us on YouTube if you miss anything. Before we get started, I'd like to remind everyone that we have Cantonese and Vietnamese interpretations today. You can click on the interpretation button at the bottom to choose Chinese, Cantonese, and Vietnamese. A reminder to our speakers to talk slowly so that our interpreters can best capture everything said. Thank you to everyone for being here today and for joining us for the 9th Annual Asian and Pacific Islander General Election Candidate Forum. Many of you might have attended our candidate forum for the primary election, and we're so glad to have you back. Today, we're going to get a chance to dive a little bit deeper with our candidates and hear their take on the issues impacting many of our communities. I'd also like to first introduce myself. Hello, friends. I am Amy Pak, she, her pronouns, a community mother, an immigrant daughter of the Korean diaspora, and I'm raising my 2 children in the Leschi neighborhood of Seattle. It's my deep honor to moderate the 9th Annual Asian and Pacific Islander General Election Candidate Forum. As a lifelong community organizer, past ACRS staff and current board director, and current program manager for King County, like you, my family and I are impacted by government policies, and like you, I deeply care about our community wellness, education, public safety, and equitable opportunities for our most vulnerable and institutionally neglected. This is our 9th year of holding our candidate forum that specifically and intentionally creates a space for the Asian Pacific Islander and Native Hawaiians that make up our 15% of our city and 20% of our county. This forum is just one of the many ways that Asian and Pacific Islander communities for decades have built grassroots and organizational and institutional power for our communities and created an infrastructure for political and civic activism that will last for years to come. We acknowledge that today we're building upon the legacy and work for our elders, our activists, and our community members who have long believed that our people deserve more. Today is about just that, about how our elected officials can make sure our communities, especially those on the margins, can live healthy, safe, and full lives. We will be hearing from candidates from very important races that you'll see on your November ballot: King County Executive, Seattle Mayor, and City Council positions 8 and 9. Before we get started, there's some important acknowledgements that make this annual event happen so successfully. First, this candidate forum is being organized and endorsed by a number of Asian and Pacific Islander serving organizations, including Interim CDA, APACE, SCID PDA, ACRS, CARE Washington, REWA, CSEC, Equity and Education Coalition, Wing Luke Museum, and Utopia Washington. As a planning committee, we'd like to acknowledge that our communities are not a monolith. While we will cover important issues today, we by no means can speak to all of the issues that impact and address the diversity of the Asian community and the unique needs of the Pacific Islander and Native Hawaiian communities. We'd also like to acknowledge that as we are here today to listen to candidates running for office in the city of Seattle and King County, we are on the ancestral lands of the Coast Salish people. We want to respectfully acknowledge the Coast Salish people who have lived on this land for more generations than can be counted, and who are still our neighbors and community members, and they are stewarding this land and water. We pay respect to the elders, past and present. Please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us here today. I'd like to now invite our colleague, Haley Watkins from King County Elections, to speak about how you can vote in the upcoming election.
Great. Thank you, Amy, and thank you all for having me this evening. I am so thrilled to be here to represent us at King County Elections. And our director, Julie Wise, sends her apologies that she's not able to make it herself this evening. I know she would have loved to be here with you. I'm just going to go over some information about how you can get your ballot in and feel confident in casting your vote. So everybody who is registered to vote should already have their ballot in hand. We mailed those out last week on the 13th. If you do not have a ballot, please give us a call first thing in the morning, 8:30 a.m. we open up, and our phone number is 206-296-8683, and our staff can get you set up so that you can get a ballot and cast your vote. We have another important deadline coming up on Monday. Monday, the October 25th is the last day that you can register to vote online or by mail with a paper registration form. It does have to be received by our office by Monday, not postmarked. Of course, online is the fastest and most convenient way to register to vote. You can do that at votewa.gov. After Monday, though, you can still register to vote all the way up until 8 p.m. on election night. You can come see us at our vote centers. I'll talk a little bit more about our vote centers here in just a minute. And then, of course, ballots are due back to us at King County Elections by Tuesday, November 2nd. That is Election Day. Our drop boxes close at 8 p.m. sharp, or it has to be postmarked by Election Day. And we are projecting 46% turnout for this election, which is in line with what we see in typical off-year general elections. In 2019, we hit 49%. In 2017, we were at 43%. So that 43 or 46% projection puts us right in between that. Of course, we always want to see higher voter turnout. So talk to your friends, talk to your family, get folks returning their ballots, and so that all of our neighbors can make their voices heard. We are voting on 332 offices and 15 ballot measures here in King County. Now, of course, you will not see 332 offices on your ballot, thank goodness. That would be a really long one to fill out. But that is how many offices we have up for election. And we are voting on everything from county executive and county council races to mayor and city council races to school boards. And all kinds of special purpose districts. Those are our fire districts, our hospital districts, our cemetery districts, all of those lovely things that are scattered throughout the county, as well as some judge positions as well. And then we have a number of measures on the ballot, including a county charter amendment, some taxes, levies, state advisory votes, a whole great mix of things. And the wonderful thing about this year is that it's a local election year. There is a lot of focus on presidential elections, which they're exciting. They're great. We love a presidential election at King County Elections. But these local elections are really the ones that make the biggest and fastest impact on our community. You know, we are talking about our schools and our parks and our roads and transit, how our tax dollars get spent. All of those things are decided most immediately at the local level. So local elections are so important, and I just want to encourage everybody to participate. And next slide, please. Great. And we have 74 ballot drop boxes around King County. In fact, 96% of our voters have a ballot drop box within a 3-mile radius of their home. So there is probably a ballot drop box near you. You can find all of them on our website, including our newest location, which is on the UW Bothell campus. But we have tons and tons. We have 74 ballot drop boxes across King County. So lots of opportunities to get your ballot into us. That is the fastest way to get your ballot back to us, and it is an incredibly secure way to get your ballot back to us. These drop boxes are 1,000 pounds. They're made of 1/2-inch thick steel, and they're open 24 hours a day. They are bolted into the ground with steel bolts and double locked and have seals and all kinds of safety and security measures. We even have fire stoppers in there in case anything got sparked. So these boxes are a very secure way to drop your ballot, and we would love to see them back from you that way. Again, they close at 8 p.m. sharp. That is important. It's not 8 p.m. in 1 second. It's not 8:02, and it's especially not 8:15. So make sure that you have your ballot in by then. The earlier, the better. There is no reason to wait until the last minute to get in your vote. You have lots of opportunities, and they are emptied every single day by teams of 2 with our trained staff. Next slide. And we have several vote center locations. So vote centers are places that you can go to get a replacement ballot, get registered in person. We have assistive devices for those with disabilities and who need a little extra help casting a private and secure ballot. We are open now at our King County Elections headquarters in Renton. And then starting on the 30th, Saturday the 30th, we will be open in Federal Way, Kent, Bellevue, Seattle at the Lumen Field Event Center, Kenmore City Hall, and we have a student engagement hub on the UW Seattle campus. So we have lots of options there as well for folks to come and get the help that they need. And we are there to serve you and excited to see our voters here in just a week or so. So come by and see us if you need any help at all. And next slide. So as I mentioned, you should give us a call if you have not received your ballot. We do offer customer service in over 20 languages, and we have ballots and materials in Chinese, Vietnamese, Korean, and Spanish. To sign up to get your voting materials in any of those languages, again, you can give us a call. You can also go online to our website, which is kingcounty.gov/elections, and change your language preference there. We translate all of our materials, and then all of our website is translated, and all of our informational and outreach materials are translated as well. So please don't hesitate to let us know, and we will get you materials in whichever of those languages that you prefer. As I said, make sure to vote and return your ballot by Election Day. The earlier, the better. Get it in this weekend, get it in next week. We love to see those early ballots. They help us post the most meaningful results on election night, the fullest picture of results on election night. And you don't have to sweat, hitting a red light or dinner running late on election day. You know that you have done your part and gotten your vote in. Once you get your vote in, we want to encourage you to track your ballot as well. So we have an online ballot tracker available for everybody to use, and you can see where your ballot is in the process. And particularly if there is an issue with your signature or you forgot to sign, that's going to be the fastest way to learn that and get that solved so that we can count your vote. Or if you're all good, like 99% of our voters with no signature issues, you will see that your ballot has been accepted and counted when that happens, and you can rest easy knowing that your vote is in. And then make sure that you help your friends and family make a plan to vote. It can sound kind of silly, but walking through, which day you're going to vote, who are you going to vote with? Are you going to sit down at the dinner table and vote with your family? Are you going to vote with your friends over a cup of coffee? Are you going to vote by yourself with your dog? How are you going to vote? When are you going to vote? And how are you going to return your ballot? Having those couple of things in place makes it much more likely that you will follow through and vote. So make sure to encourage your friends and family to make a vote plan and help them walk through that planning process so that they can make their voices heard too. And that's all I have.
Thank you so much for the information, Haley. So appreciated. We will now begin the candidate forum with the King County executive race. Joining us here today are King County Executive Dow Constantine and State Senator Joe Nguyen. The format will be as follows. Candidates will each be given 1 minute for their opening statement to introduce themselves and name their top 3 issue areas. Candidates will each then be asked to answer a long answer question with 90 seconds to respond. A short answer question with 30 seconds to respond, and a series of yes or no questions. Overall, the candidates will be asked 3 long questions, 3 short answer questions, and 7 yes or no questions. We will then have the opportunity for 1 audience question, which you can submit via the question tool on Zoom. We will only have time for 1 audience question that'll be chosen by our team based on what issues we have already covered. We will then end with a quick closing question. We will follow the same format for the City Council and Mayoral Forum. We ask that candidates do not go over the allotted time for each question, as we are on a tight time schedule today and want to be fair in giving each candidate equal time to speak. I will politely cut you off if you run over time, and if you continue to speak, we will have to use the mute button. I apologize in advance for cutting anyone off, but my main role today is to facilitate a fair process where community members can hear from all candidates. Please make my job easier than the presidential debate. Can we all agree to that, dear candidates?
I'll just hold it here.
Lastly, a reminder again to all candidates to speak loudly and slowly so that our interpreters can follow. Thank you, and let's get started. We will now start with an opening statement from each candidate, where you will be given 1 minute to introduce yourself and speak about your top 3 priority issues you plan to address as King County Executive. Joe Nguyen, you are up first.
Perfect. Thank you so much for having us this evening as well. I'm Senator Joe Nguyen from the 34th Legislative District, and I'm not your typical person that you would see in office. I'm the son of refugees born in South King County and grew up very poor, especially after my father was in a car accident. I worked as a janitor in high school to make ends meet, and even while serving as student body president in college, I washed dishes at night at our family's restaurant. And in fact, I'm not that different from, I think, a lot of the children that many of the organizations present here have served over the years. My background is actually in finance. I've worked in leadership roles in startups, and now I'm in strategy and analytics at Microsoft. And I got involved in public service because I believed that our community deserved better. I worked with elected officials and community leaders throughout the years and felt that we needed leaders who would act with urgency, who reflect the values of our communities to actually get things done. And we've been able to transform how things were done at the legislature, passing progressive policies that have been fighting for decades to accomplish, uplifting the voices of those who've been left out. And that's why I'm running for King County, to bring that energy there as well. And our top issues, affordability and homelessness, I think is one, climate change, transit the other, and then public safety for all communities as well.
Thank you, Senator Joe Nguyen. And just a reminder to speak slowly for our interpreters. Thank you. Executive Dow, please go ahead.
Thank you so much. Sorry, we're having to improvise the sound and light a bit here today, but such is the nature of campaigning. I'm Dow Constantine, King County Executive. When COVID landed here first, we centered science and reason and saved lives. And we're continuing that with our nation-leading vaccine effort. Pleased to let you know that the Asian, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander community has a vaccine rate now of some 95%, absolutely astonishing. The top 3 issues really, in addition to managing the COVID crisis, are climate and my work on building out an electric regional transit system, creating an anti-racist government and region, and generating really economic justice, and our work to get the homeless off the streets with the services to help them stay housed. Pleased to have been endorsed today by the Northwest Asian Weekly and many others. I look forward to the forum.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Dow. Thank you for the opening statements. We will now have our first long answer question, where you will be given 90 seconds to respond. How will you address the rise in anti-Asian violence in King County? Will you rely on law enforcement and the prosecuting attorney's office? How will you prioritize the well-being of other communities of color in thinking through solutions to anti-Asian violence? First up, we have Dow. Please start.
Well, thank you. The pandemic obviously worsened economic disparities and increased racist violence and xenophobia, but that was also very much facilitated by the last president, who gave license to people to surface their bigotry and hate. We have to unite to denounce hate, anti-Asian hate and violence, especially racially based hate and violence generally. This has been something that has been a deep concern for all of us. In my own family, my mother-in-law, my wife's mother, who's a Japanese immigrant, has been tremendously frightened by this. She's an elderly woman living by herself, afraid in her own country of going out in public because of what she's seeing on television and reading about in the papers. This is an outrage that can't be allowed to stand. We're continuing to work directly with community leaders to build a government wholly committed to anti-racism. Our rapid response funding has been directed to Know Your Rights outreach, to information hubs, to a legal defense fund. And more law enforcement is not the answer, though clearly the police need to respond to crimes and need to be able to respond to crimes. But we need long-term systemic solutions.
Thank you, Dow. Joe, please go ahead.
Thank you so much for this question. Obviously, it's very pertinent right now as well. And I think, first off, addressing the violence and taking care of the victims who've been harmed, having crisis intervention responses, including mental health services for those who've been impacted. One of the biggest things that we could be doing as well is encouraging our community members to report hate crimes, because they often go unreported. So for us to better understand the scope and scale of this problem, but truly also advocating for awareness. This violence did not come from out of the blue. And this is not something that is new, even for me in my life as well. And I've seen how it could pervade throughout our communities. In fact, my first speech on the Senate floor was met with ridicule of my last name. So the fact that we're seeing it in those levels, we know that it is a persistent thing that happens in our communities. And these stereotypes often perceive us as foreigners, even in our own country. We have to be able to flip that paradigm by promoting and empowering solidarity within the Asian communities. We have to push for disaggregated data, fight back against the model minority myth. And for us to actually achieve some of these goals, we need to fund the organizations already doing the work in the Asian communities as well. And that's one of the biggest things that we've been doing in this space. And I know that the county had earmarked about $5 million towards Asian communities to combat anti-Asian hate. Last I heard, it was not quite done just yet. Hopefully that is not correct. But if that is the case, we need to make sure that that funding is allocated to the appropriate communities to fight back against these harms.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you both. Moving on to our first short answer, where you will be given 30 seconds each to respond. How do you plan to address the needs of BIPOC-owned small businesses in King County, and specifically businesses with limited English and digital proficiency, to be able to access resources they need to prosper during and as we emerge from the ongoing pandemic? We'll start with Joe this time.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And as a young person who had a family with a small business, I had to interpret a lot of the documentation in terms of being able to open up our small businesses. So having an Office of Economic Development focused specifically on the BIPOC community, having professional resources to negotiate leases and legal issues associated with it as well, making sure that we have a fund to help our small businesses be able to negotiate long-term leases. Those are some of the ways that we can ensure that happens, because access to services is not possible when you don't have the resources to actually interpret some of these documentations.
Thank you, Joe. Go ahead, Dal.
We've dedicated funding to digital equity out of our Office of Equity and Social Justice. I have put $25 million into BIPOC business recovery through our federal COVID funds and established a steering committee to make sure that money gets out to where it's needed. Our work is continuing to, apropos the previous comment about $5 million, to invest in anti-hate work, particularly work in ethnic media to make sure that people are reporting hate crimes.
I will now ask 4 yes or no questions. I will ask each question and then ask each of you to get your yes, no, or pass. Please keep your answer to only yes, no, or pass. First question. Do you support moving the city towards free public transit during your time as King County Executive if elected? Dow.
Yes.
Joe.
Yes.
Question 2. Do you support reducing law enforcement's budget and redirecting it to social services and community programs? Joe.
Yes.
Dow.
No.
Question 3. Do you support the recently submitted motion by Councilmember Zahilai and Up the Grove to restore race and gender conscious affirmative action practices in King County? Dow.
Yes.
Joe.
Yes.
Question 4. Do you support extending the eviction moratorium past the current October 31st deadline for Washington State? Joe.
Yes.
Dow.
No.
Thank you both. Moving on to long answer question 2, where you will again have 90 seconds to respond. With over 11,000 people in King County living without stable housing, how do you plan to address homelessness and support our city's unsheltered community? How will you address equity for Black and Native communities who are disproportionately affected? Joe, you're up first this time.
Thank you so much. One of the most effective ways to address the crisis that we're facing now is diversion. It is 3 to 5 times cheaper to keep somebody housed than it is to take them out of homelessness. And that's why I've advocated so much for rent relief. I've advocated for basic needs programs. Those who are on the margins, if we're able to keep them stable and housed, they will be stable and housed for the longer term as well. But the other issues that we'll need to tackle are the folks who are currently unhoused on our streets, making sure that we have emergency housing options, everything from tiny homes, hotels, non-congregate shelters. One of the things that we'll point out that oftentimes gets lost in this conversation is we need to have the social service providers and the mental and behavioral health providers to be able to mitigate some of the harms being impacted by folks in the community. Oftentimes having the space obviously is important, but making sure that we also have the resources and the professional health providers in order to help these communities become stable and healthy is crucial to this effort as well. And obviously we have a short amount of time, but being able to build more affordable housing is crucial, and not just the market rate housing. We need to think about 0 to 30% AMI, 30 to 60% AMI, using innovative strategies like land trust, making sure that we are efficiently using our surplus lands, and then partnering with our public-private partnerships for the rest as well. So short-term diversion programs, long-term more affordable housing, and having the basic needs in place to help our community members.
Thank you, Joe. Just
yeah, and I'll see that. I'll try to slow down as well.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Thank you all. Okay, please go ahead, Dow.
Well, first, keeping people housed is critical, and our eviction prevention and rental assistance program is running at full speed now. We've had days where we pushed as much as $3 million out in a single day. And that's why I answer that we don't need to extend the eviction moratorium, because we have the rental assistance and teams stationed at the courthouse to intercept anyone who gets through that screen so that we can prevent people from being evicted and make sure the landlords are paid. We have stood up our Health Through Housing initiative, where I'm buying $350 million worth of new homes for those who've been chronically homeless. moving them inside with the services to stay housed and begin to reclaim their lives. There will be 1,600 of those units, another 3,800 affordable homes that we're in the process of building. And in all of it, we are focused like a laser on the racial disproportionality in homelessness and in housing insecurity. Our eviction prevention program is critical to this work because it is much more difficult to get someone out of homelessness than to prevent them from falling into it. And finally, we have moved to hire 400 people who've been homeless and unemployed to give them jobs at $20 to $25 an hour, helping to put our parks and streets back together and to move on with their lives as well.
Thank you. So for the shorter question, this gives you a little more time to elaborate. You'll be given 30 seconds each to respond. King County has roughly $123 million left to spend for rent relief. And while this will cover around 10,000 households, this is less than half the number who have applied. How will you support allocating additional funds to cover the remaining households? We'll start with Dow.
First off, the number's not correct. We have allocated a very large percentage of the funding we've already received. Most of the rest of the funding will be made available by the end of October, the first week of November. However, we're anticipating another $175 million in federal funds arriving very soon. We now have the personnel, we have the systems, we have the applications still coming in and the outreach with our community partners to make sure people stay housed.
Thank you. Joe, please go ahead.
Yeah, I think the broader point of that question is that the relief that we even have in place, despite it coming out late, even if it was fully out, won't be enough to keep people housed, given the scope and scale of the pandemic that we're facing right now, especially those in underserved communities as well. And that's why I said I would be open to extending the eviction moratorium because of that fact. It is important for us to ensure that people are stable and housed. And until we can guarantee that that's going to happen for the vast majority of people, it'll make it very difficult. We will be allocating hopefully more funding from the federal government, but that's my response from earlier.
Thank you. I will now ask a second round of 3 yes or no questions. I will once again ask each question and then get a yes, no, or pass from both of you. First question. Are you committed to addressing climate change in the county in a way that prioritizes disproportionately impacted low-income communities of color? Joe.
Yes.
Joe.
Yes.
Second question. Do you support generating progressive revenue for the county by taxing big business and the wealthy? Joe.
Yes.
Joe.
Yes.
Third, it is critical to the safety and livelihood of sex workers for governments and nonprofits to dissect the conflation of human trafficking in which there is a perpetrator and a victim, and sex work in which both adults consent to the service. Do you support the decriminalization of sex work? Dow.
Yes.
Joe.
Yes.
Thank you. Now for our last long answer question with 90 seconds to respond. Given police killings in recent years of Charleena Lyles, Tommy Lay, Manuel Ellis, Iosia Felatogo, and many others, as well as the county's difficulty in ensuring justice for victims' families through the inquest process, how do you plan to address issues of police violence, use of lethal force, and need for accountability? Dow, we'll start with you, please.
So this is an exciting opportunity going into the next year because we're taking over control of the sheriff's office due to a charter amendment, and we'll be remaking the duties and structure of the sheriff's office as well as appointing a new sheriff. We've convened a community-based group, including representatives from over-policed communities, to help describe the way in which we're going to do that. And I'll be receiving the report in just a couple of weeks. Meanwhile, in the tragic instances of police-involved shootings and deaths, I convened a group to remake our inquest process. And that was a labor of love, along with the family members of those who have died. We created a new process designed to be transparent, designed to get to the facts and get to the changes that need to happen in police agencies. I was sued by many police agencies, but we took it to the Supreme Court and won. That's why I'm proud to be endorsed by Davida Briscoe, for example, from Not This Time, someone who worked directly with me and understands my commitment to making sure that people are not afraid of agents of the state who've been given a gun and a badge and authority of other people's lives. We have to make policing consistent with the values of the people of King County in the 21st century, and I'm going to do it.
Thank you, Dow. Go ahead, Joe, please.
Thank you so much. One of the reasons why I got involved in the first place was because of a young man named Tommy Lay, who was shot by law enforcement in Burien, and being able to organize on behalf of him and his family as well. And the sheriff's appointment is one of the most important pieces of reform for the justice system, probably for decades to come. I think that's one of the crucial points. But we've seen a study recently that has shown that upwards to 80% of responses for law enforcement in the Seattle area are for non-criminal activity. And in fact, 50% of them, a non-sworn community member could have responded to those cases instead of having a law enforcement official. And in particular, there were recommendations around a new model for a tiered system, depending on the types of responses that are needed. That's how we're going to address the solution in the long term. We have to reimagine what public safety looks like from the eyes of the community members as well. So if there are first responders where it's littering or a noise complaint, you could have a different type of response. If there's a situation with a behavioral mental health crisis, there's different types of response. And if there are needs for assault or shots fired or crime in progress, there's a different type of response. We have to critically think about the process in which we're existing now, how it's not working for a lot of people, and being able to implement a new solution. That's how we're going to transform this. And we can't do it just using the status quo.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Dow. So now we will have our last short answer question with 30 seconds to respond. Soon, Sound Transit will release their study of the impacts and effects of their new light rail project connecting Ballard and West Seattle and running through the Chinatown International District. How will you, as county executive, work with the community to mitigate the negative impacts of ST3 project on the CID neighborhood and ensure that it does not increase the displacement of low-income residents and culturally significant small businesses? Joe, please start this time.
Thank you so much. This is a very important question, and we've done some work at the legislature as well. Anti-displacement as a whole is something we have to tackle, and it happens oftentimes in areas that will potentially be gentrified, including along that transit spine. So first off, there are community members who I believe are experts in this space. We should uplift and amplify their voices and make sure that they are not just at the table, but making the decisions themselves as well. That's one of the biggest things. And being mindful and proactive that this is something that will happen. So having anti-displacement funds in place, but also plans imposed before this happens. Sorry, 30 seconds is very short.
Thank you so much. Go ahead, please, Dal.
Well, yes, we put a number of alternatives into the process to make sure that there was a good opportunity to choose an option that has the least impacts on the CID. And the long-term benefits obviously are enormous, particularly to the businesses. We're going to be working with the groups and the public to make sure that we get the right mitigation in place. I am personally committed to that. I appoint about half the Sound Transit board, so they necessarily have to listen to me on this. And we're going to, I think, deliver a product that everyone can be very proud of.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So our closing question, as of now, we don't have any audience questions. So we will finish our King County executive portion of the candidate forum with a short closing question where you'll be given 30 seconds to respond. Please tell us 3 people, whether they're mentors, figures, colleagues, that help inform your views on issues facing Asian and Pacific Islander communities. Joe, please start.
Yeah, Silly Savusa is a champion for the White Center community, but also in the AAPI community. Senator Bob Hasagawa is a tremendous leader that I listen to as well. And this sounds cheesy, but my mom also is one of those people on that list, just because she's somebody that has had to face a lot of things throughout her life. And she may not know it, but I'll pick her brain oftentimes on some of these issues and use her as a kind of a focus group as well.
Thank you. Please go ahead, Dow.
Well, first, Governor Locke has endorsed my campaign, whom I've known for many, many years. Someone I just met quite recently, Kim Kan Van, who I've been out doorbelling with and been able to share a lot of thoughts and insights with. And then, along the same theme, Joe, my wife, who is the person who's in my ear every day about the discrimination that sometimes I can't see. She really is my conscience and my guide.
Thank you so much to both of our King County executive candidates. You both did very well today. We're grateful for you making the time to be here, and thank you for the incredible hard work you both put in every day for our region. Thank you. We are now going to move on to the City Council portion of our candidate forum. Today, we will be featuring candidates for City Council positions 8 and 9. As a reminder, these City Council positions represent the entire city. So they will be representing all of you, even though there are 2 separate races for positions 8 and 9. For the sake of time, we have grouped the candidates for this part of the forum. For City Council position 8, the candidates are Kenneth Wilson and Teresa Mosqueda. For City Council position 9, the candidates are Nikita Oliver and Sarah Nelson. We will follow the same format as the King County Executive Forum, where candidates will give a 1-minute opening statement to introduce themselves and name their top 3 issue areas. Candidates will each then be asked a long answer question with 90 seconds to respond, a short answer question with 30 seconds to respond, and a series of yes or no questions. Overall, the candidates will be asked 3 long answer questions, 3 short answer questions, and 8 yes or no questions. We will once again have the opportunity for 1 audience question, which you can submit via the question tool on Zoom. We will only have time for 1 audience question, so make it good. That will be chosen by our team based on what issues we have already covered. We will then end with a quick closing question. So let's go ahead and start with an opening statement from each candidate, where you will be given 1 minute to introduce yourself and speak about your top 3 priority issues as a citywide City Council member. To make the distinctions among races, we will start with position 8 races every time. First up, we have Teresa Mosqueda.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. Good to see you again, Amy. I am so incredibly proud of the opportunity to have represented the entire city of Seattle in position 8 over the last 4 years. In the last 4 years, we've had the opportunity to be on the national stage with recognition for the work we've done in protecting frontline workers, from improving conditions and protections for hotel workers, for domestic workers, a large population of immigrants and communities of color, especially women workers. I've passed progressive revenue with the support of large business and small and housing and community activists. And in this time of the pandemic, I've stepped up as your budget chair to make sure that we are investing directly in small businesses and our frontline workers. With your support, I'm going to go back into office and we're going to implement those dollars to create more housing and economic opportunity for everyone, especially our communities of color, immigrants and refugees who are coming to the city to start their own businesses and create greater opportunities. Thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight.
Thank you. And Kenneth Wilson, please go ahead.
Thanks so much. Good evening. I'm Kenneth Wilson. I'm a 28-year resident of this beautiful city of Seattle. And I'm a structural bridge engineer and a civil engineer for the last 30 years. I'm running because I see our incumbent politicians cannot find solutions to the increasing homeless. They're failing us with our roads and our infrastructure. They've had a long time to address our challenges with trees and critical urban canopy, and we don't see it. We see continued closed businesses. And public safety, quite frankly, is the worst it's been in memory and getting worse. So even in each of these things, I'm here to present a plan and make a challenge, make a difference, give you that voice back on the council. I'm one of 9 people that are here, and I come with very different qualifications, a civil engineer, a background in trying to get solutions and making things work out. I own my own business since 2005, and I'm used to tackling challenging problems, and I welcome this chance here.
Thank you. Nikita Oliver.
Well, good evening. My name is Nikita Oliver. I use they, them pronouns. I'm running for Seattle City Council citywide position 9. I am a working candidate, renter in the Rainier Beach neighborhood, nonprofit executive director in the Central District. I have worked as an educator, attorney, and frontline service provider in our city, living here for nearly 17 years. And I am running because we need elected officials who will get to the root causes, who will address the crises we are facing with solutions that are commensurate with those crises. We are focused on building deeply affordable, green social housing and putting in place anti-gentrification policies to protect our communities, addressing public safety through a public health lens, and progressive revenue generation so that our budget can be stable and we can meet the basic needs of all residents. I am endorsed by Apace Votes, Celie Savusa, Sutapa Basu, Cindy Domingo, Velma Valoria, and Unite Here 8, and excited to share space with you this evening.
Thank you. Sarah Nelson.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming tonight. My name is Sarah, and I've lived in Seattle for 30 years, came here to get a PhD in cultural anthropology. I'm a mom with 2 teenage boys and a former public servant, worked for Seattle City Council member Richard Conlin for 10 years, and I'm also a small business owner. And so that is a good combination of skills and background to bring to bear on our challenges. We need some pragmatic and progressive policy solutions right now, because I look around and I think that that the policies of council right now are failing our most vulnerable. I toured the CID early on in my campaign, and I noticed that a failure to pay attention to basic services, roads, parks, and basic infrastructure is really hurting the CID. My other big priority is economic recovery. It's about time for someone who knows how to help the small businesses. I know that you're faced with displacement and other issues that are specific to the CID, and I'm here to help. I'm endorsed by the Northwest Asian News, Gary Locke. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for your opening statements. We will now have our first long answer question, where you will be given 90 seconds to respond. First question, how will you address the rise in anti-Asian violence? How will you prioritize the well-being and safety of all communities of color in thinking through solutions to anti-Asian violence? First up, we will start with Kenneth Wilson.
Great, thanks very much for this question. And in particular, the Asian community has been challenged with public safety that is just unreal. I think it all stems down to support for our police and what has been available. We've saw the police have actually had huge staff cuts. A number of police have given up their positions to go elsewhere, and we're having a lot of trouble even trying to fill positions. We have long response calls or no call or no response at all to many of the 911 calls. So our emergency response, our safety and public safety for Asian communities and all communities is really important. But most importantly, we have to start enforcing laws. We know what's on the books. Sorry, I didn't know if I was muted, but anyway, and it's really important that we actually start getting back to basics so that people know the ground rules. We have all seen it, and this is about, starting a game with an understanding of here's the rules we're all going to follow. We've seen where misdemeanors have been allowed, huge amounts of broken glass for businesses, tip jars are stolen, graffiti, so many things, and even the encampments alongside the road. These are each challenges that have to be dealt with on a level that allows our police to maintain support and get a public safety for the people. So it's really important that we start supporting that police, and I would be a voice on the council to actually do that and reverse course, allow us to support them and have a way forward, especially for this aging community.
Thank you, Kenneth. Teresa, please.
Do you mind repeating the question?
Sure. How will you address the rise in anti-Asian violence? How will you prioritize the well-being and safety of all communities of color in thinking through solutions to anti-Asian violence?
Thank you very much for the question. First, we need to start with an affirmative statement that violent hate crimes, especially against our AAPI community, have no place in Seattle, no place in this country. And in the wake of what we've seen in terms of hate crimes and a racism that has been prevalent across our country and right here in Seattle, we need to affirmatively stand by that and put resources and policy commitments behind that statement. I have worked with members of the CID and the AAPI community to make sure that in the wake of the hate crimes that we saw, we worked quickly to expedite funding, especially to our smallest businesses and workers, and to create stability and protections for folks. And we know that protection does not always equal an officer with a gun showing up, especially for some in our community who are from communities of color, including our AAPI community, who have been on the receiving end of violence and increased enforcement from officers. We need to make sure that we are creating a public safety response system that recognizes that sometimes when you are a person of color and you dial 911, you are met with additional force. And we want to make sure that there's a way to have community-driven solutions, that we have trusted community partners and organizations that can help create community service officer and enhance community programs around our communities, especially in the CID. I have the support of community members from Uncle Frank Aragon to Representative Jayapal, and the support of APACE, because I know the importance of centering investments in those who have experienced the trauma and leading with their voice first. That's what I will do for public safety.
Thank you, Teresa. Sarah, please go ahead.
I agree with Teresa that we do need to stand up, speak out, and recognize that this is a growing problem. But unfortunately, what we see is only the tip of the iceberg, because anti-Asian hate and violence often goes unreported for many reasons, be it language barriers or fear of retaliation amongst undocumented people. The list goes on, but the point is that the King County just has set up the Coalition Against Hate and Bias, and that is a model that Seattle can support and perhaps replicate. This is one in which the Chinese Information Service Center and SCID PDA and the Vietnamese Service Center Agents Association, they bring reports of violence to the law enforcement agencies. Right now, that information is not collected uniformly, so we need to know and act at the same time. And when it comes to acting, I'm concerned about the state of public safety in this city. Calls to defund the police by 50% or abolish it altogether, as my opponent wants to, is not going to help reduce or address anti-Asian violence. And we must be mindful of the fact that response times are so slow. And if the police come at all, sometimes there are language barriers. And so my plan for public safety includes recruiting officers from diverse communities. Yes, we need to reform the police, but we must do so in a way that keeps people safe and holds officers accountable.
Thank you, Sarah. Nikita, please.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Teresa, for pointing out that many of our communities of color, including our Asian American and Pacific Islander communities, may not feel comfortable calling the police for many reasons, especially our undocumented loved ones or folks who work in massage parlors. What I think we need to do is really develop strategies that are community-based, focus on prevention, collective care, accountability, and healing. First, we have to acknowledge and condemn this violent hate when it occurs and speak out against it. We need to create and strengthen anti-discrimination bodies, human rights organizations, and strengthen our community-based organizations that are already doing really important work in the Chinatown International District and have exchanges between groups like the corner greeters in Rainier Beach and those working in Chinatown so they can share what they've learned about being able to decrease violence in their neighborhoods. We should be conducting outreach and education in culturally appropriate ways and languages that are accessible so that folks know what resources are available, providing support directly to survivors to address the needs from fear and healing that have been caused by violent acts in the neighborhood. And then support community collaborations with groups in the Chinatown International District, corner greeters, Maxim Man, and the NAACP, and really increasing our community presence through changing lighting, having activation activities, and setting up safety groups who can be present in neighborhoods so that instead of exacerbating public safety crisis through policing, we can increase safety through community care.
Thank you, Nikita. Thank you, everyone, for your responses. Next, we'll have a short answer question where all candidates will be given 30 seconds to respond. How do you plan to address the needs of BIPOC-owned small businesses in Seattle, and specifically businesses with limited English and digital proficiency, to be able to access resources they need to prosper during and as we emerge from the ongoing pandemic? First up, we will have Teresa Mosqueda.
Thank you again for the opportunity to be here tonight. Some of the things that I've done in my time at the City of Seattle has been to increase funding to the Office of Labor Standards. The Office of Labor Standards is charged with doing outreach and engagement with small employers as well as workers. Often we find that sometimes there's not compliance with new laws because workers and employers don't know about those laws. We need to translate that information and make sure we're doing education first. The second thing that I would do is continue to get money from the federal relief and our state partners directly to small businesses. That's what I've done in the past, and I'll continue to do that in this next tranche.
Thank you. Kenneth Wilson.
For in particular, these small businesses, it's really, there's several things going on. It's hard for a business to actually function in Seattle right now. There's safety issues. So first off, is getting safety and stability for these businesses. Small businesses, there is small business training and outreach. So actually making those more readily available would be very beneficial to these types of businesses. I did that when I formed my own small business, so I could see how this could be really valuable. Also providing access to lending and features that we have access to money, federal level money, so allowing them to pass that along.
Thank you so much. Nikita Oliver.
Yeah, so the first very significant barrier is language. Nearly our entire website for the city of Seattle, other resources are not translated in all of the languages that our businesses in the Chinatown International District would need to access information. Second, we need to stop expecting that communities will go to our website and actually go to communities with culturally appropriate technical supports and language supports. And third, make sure they're family and culturally specific.
Thank you. Sarah Nelson.
Well, as a small business owner, I know how difficult it is to start and grow a business in Seattle. And I know that it's even worse for BIPOC business owners, entrepreneurs. Why? Because lack of capital. And it's very difficult to access low interest loans. And so those are two things that I will be focusing on. Also, technical support, doing everything from writing a business plan to get a line of credit, to just navigating the morass of permitting and licensing. There's so much more that can be done. I am concerned about displacement of businesses in the CID and with new development.
Thank you, Sarah. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I will now ask 4 yes or no questions. I will ask each question and then ask each of you to get your yes, no, or pass. Please keep your answer to only yes, no, or pass. First question, Do you support moving the city towards free public transit during your term if elected? Kenneth,
No.
Teresa,
Absolutely, yes.
Sarah,
No.
Nikita.
Yes.
Second question. Seattle's domestic workers, like house cleaners and nannies, are overwhelmingly women, majority BIPOC, and immigrants, and earn low wages. Recent surveys in Seattle show nearly 60% of domestic workers, including 80% of house cleaners, do not get any form of paid time off, including Seattle paid sick time. Domestic workers in Seattle have proposed a solution to this policy gap of a portable benefits policy. Under this policy, workers would receive paid time off from each employer they work for as they move from job to job. Would you support a portable benefits policy for domestic workers? Nikita,
Yes.
Sarah,
Yeah.
Teresa,
Yes, and sponsoring a resolution.
Kenneth.
No.
Third question. Do you support reducing the Seattle Police Department's budget and redirecting law enforcement funding to social services and community programs? Kenneth,
No, I would not reduce budget.
Teresa,
Yes.
Sarah,
No.
Nikita.
Yes.
Fourth question. Beacon Hill is one of Seattle's most diverse neighborhoods, and residents are majority from communities of color. Aircraft from SeaTech fly over Beacon Hill almost 90 to 180 seconds, emitting harmful air and noise pollution. Do you plan to hold SeaTech Airport accountable for the harmful health, environment, and climate impacts on Beacon Hill residents and its neighbors? Nikita,
Yes.
Sarah,
Pass.
Teresa,
Yes, and sponsor the noise pollution study.
Kenneth.
Pass.
Thank you all. We will now move on to our second long answer question, where you will again be given 90 seconds each to respond. With over 5,500 people in Seattle, that's 5,500 people in Seattle living without stable housing, how do you plan to address homelessness and support our city's unsheltered community? We'll start with Teresa this time.
Thank you so much. And I will scale back on my answer a little bit because I added that sentence. First thing that we're going to do is we're going to implement the Jumpstart Progressive payroll tax dollars that I help lead the effort on in City Council that brings in over 135 million specifically dedicated to building affordable housing. This is our opportunity to create 4,000 units of affordable housing starting next year. And that alone is not enough, but it's an important down payment coupled with the other existing revenue streams and the acquisition of existing buildings and derelict buildings that I have passed in the past that will allow us to begin to increase the housing supply in Seattle. In addition to that, under my tenure as chair of housing, we have increased the opportunity for first-time home buyers to have a place to call their own in Seattle. This is especially important for communities of color who have been long priced out and pushed out of the ability to own in Seattle. We've increased home ownership dollars by threefold in my term in Seattle. I'll continue to also make sure that there's good living wage jobs in Seattle. That is why I was the lead sponsor of the Domestic Workers Bill of Rights and worked with employers and workers to make sure that we led the nation on that legislation and make sure that there's more opportunities for small business owners to open up their establishments like my grandma did when she and my grandpa opened Tasty Tacos in Des Moines, Iowa, 60 years ago this year, so that more small businesses, especially immigrant families, can create their economic stability.
Thank you, Teresa. Kenneth, please.
This council right now has had year after year to address this issue with more and more money, and we can't continue to keep pouring more money into their bad plans. We need to not promote one bad idea and keep going and quit forcing from alongside a road or in a park into a tiny house, which just isn't a temporary shelter and not really a real means to address the root causes. We need to start building a way that they can transition out, build a real facility, real asset that our community owns. We have a time now where we're coming up with very large amounts of money from federal level, and it's time for us to build something, a transition housing with on-site service, job training and support with an 18 to 24 months transition area that we can create permanent facilities that we own. Even on my own website, I've added examples where we could use that with that King County Housing Authority, which they own the Metro property right there that's become obsolete. And we can now build something rapid, a modular system that would use this, but it would build a long-term plan with professional on-site plan with professionals on site to support them. We have across the bridge that I just built there up in Northgate, that community college that we could eventually engage them in classwork and things like that. But really, it's important to give, these are real people homeless with a need, give them a real plan, permanent transitioning housing, realistic time to transition, and pride in themselves for a real path forward. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Kenneth. Nikita.
So we need to address this crisis holistically, acknowledging that our city has had nearly 100 years of exclusionary zoning that has made 2/3 of our residential land inaccessible to all but those with the highest incomes. So as we approach our 2024 comprehensive plan addressing density, zoning, exclusionary zoning, gentrification, and anti-displacement strategies will be a part of this picture. Additionally, we need to think of short-term or implement short-term responses such as hoteling, non-congregate shelters, and tiny house villages to mitigate the harm immediately to ensure that people can come inside from the cold. And rather than sweeping our loved ones who are living outside, we need to find ways to create accessibility through providing hygiene, sanitation, trash removal, as well as peer navigators and case managers that are specific to a locality so that businesses and community members know who to access when they need appropriate supports. We also need to invest in deeply green social housing. This means moving through multiple strategies such as acquisition, preservation, and building housing. And this needs to be done with progressive revenue in mind. Our current tax code is woefully upside down, which puts the burden of addressing this crisis on those who are already most impacted by it. We need about $400 million per year for the next 10 years in our region to get out of this crisis, or in our city to get out of this crisis. So leveraging the Jumpstart tax and the 7 other progressive revenue options our city's identified will be key.
Thank you, Nikita. Sarah, please go ahead.
Please repeat the question.
Yes. With over 5,500 people in Seattle living without stable housing, how do you plan to address homelessness and support our city's unsheltered community?
When you put it that way, 5,500, that's 5,500 people. That's a small amount of people. And yet this is a topic that is consuming the civic conversation. So what I would say first is that we have to understand that people that are living unsheltered or housing insecure are not a monolithic block. All right, some people can be benefited by foreclosure prevention, direct rental assistance, simply better jobs. So we need to focus on workforce development. There are many things that we can do to prevent homelessness and to keep people from ending up in encampments. But when it comes to the chronically homeless, we do not have a plan. We've been throwing money away. The problem's gotten worse. And I'm supported by Gary Locke and Martha Cho and the Northwest Asian Weekly and Mike Fong and Xiao Yin. The list goes on, David Della, because I'm the candidate that says we need to focus on mental health and substance abuse treatment. When it comes to people living in encampments, simply waiting for 400 million or calling for more progressive revenue is not going to address the problem right now. I support the plan that the Regional Homelessness Authority is working on. My job as council will be to partner with them and support that region-wide plan. But we need to make sure that everything that we're doing with our discretionary funds goes to mental health and substance abuse treatment.
Thank you. Next up, we'll have our second short answer question with 30 seconds to respond. What programs would you create or support to generate progressive revenue for our city? Kenneth, please start.
I would work hard to get back our small businesses, the ones that are leaving. I would try and get real businesses to stay, things like Amazon, who's going to cross to Bellevue and so many other places. It's about us actually maintaining, we have a revenue source from these existing businesses. We need to build them. I pay as my own business, pay a revenue tax, whether I make a penny out of my job. So we can and could use that by building additional support for businesses to work and function here in Seattle. So it's about maintaining those with safety and all the other items that we're missing.
Thank you. Teresa.
Thank you so much. First, again, I'm proud that we led the passage of the Jumpstart Progressive Revenue in Seattle, and 2/3, a super majority of Seattleites support progressive revenue. The payroll tax that we passed is incredibly popular. And at the same time that we passed this, we saw more IT companies coming to Seattle, a 35% increase in the last 4 years in tech. That's the type of thing that we can do, pass progressive revenue, and it generates support for the local economy. I'd also like to see a CEO payroll tax and continue to expand upon the capital gains tax that our state legislators passed.
Thank you. Sarah.
Public confidence in local government is at an all-time low, largely because people don't see this council spending money wisely right now. Our bridges are failing. Our parks are full of trash. Libraries aren't open fully yet. And so before we talk about new revenue, having just passed Jumpstart tax, I want to see results. I want to talk about leadership, because I'm wondering, when will it ever be enough revenue? I believe that the key to dealing with a lot of the things we're talking about is to provide more access to opportunity.
Thank you, Sarah. Nikita.
So we will not be able to end our city's crisis that we're facing without some changes to how we generate revenue. We know that communities of color are experiencing a significant racial wealth gap. Our lowest 20% income bracket pays 16.8%, while the wealthiest pay 1 to 2.4%. Our Progressive Revenue Task Force has identified a number of taxes, but in addition to a wealth tax, impact fees, we can also increase the Jumpstart tax to make our budget much more sustainable. And I'll drop a link to our Progressive Revenue platform in the chat.
Thank you all. I will now ask a second round of 4 yes or no questions. I will once again ask each question and then get a yes, a no, or pass from each of you. First question. The Equitable Development Initiative, EDI, is a program created by the City of Seattle in response to the inequitable growth, displacement, and distribution of opportunities the city's marginalized residents have experienced. EDI focuses on supporting community organizations to build buildings that help promote equitable access to housing, cultural expression, healthy food, and amenities. The fund started out with $16 million in 2016 and is currently expecting slightly under $20 million a year under the Jumpstart proposal. Do you support significantly increasing funding the EDI initiative? We will start with Teresa first.
Yes.
Kenneth.
Yes.
Nikita.
Yes.
Sarah.
Yes.
Thank you. Question 2, do you support clearing encampments in public spaces, also known as sweeping? Sarah.
Yes.
Nikita.
No.
Kenneth.
Yes.
Teresa.
No, there needs to be housing first.
Question 3, thank you. It is critical to the safety and livelihood of sex workers for governments and nonprofits to dissect the conflation of human trafficking, in which there is a perpetrator and victim, and sex work, in which both adults consent to the service. Do you support the decriminalization of sex work? Teresa.
Yes.
Kenneth.
Yes.
Nikita.
Yes.
Sarah.
Yes.
Fourth question. Are you in support of the city investing in more 24-hour and regularly maintained public restrooms? Sarah,
Yes.
Nikita,
Yes.
Kenneth,
Yes.
Teresa.
Yes.
Thank you all. So now we'll move on to our long answer, our last question with 90 seconds to respond. Given police killings in recent years of Charlena Lyles, Tommy Lay, Manuel Ellis, Eosia Felatogo, and many others, as well as the city's struggle to fulfill the requirements of the federal consent decree, how do you plan to address issues of police violence, use of lethal force, and need for accountability? Kenneth, we'll start with you.
Thanks very much. Very important question for all communities and all people. Most importantly, we should look at the background where we were making great progress on the consent decree. We should also look at the governor that has signed into law 12 different more restrictive ideas to keep accountability. And we saw even King County before that, we individually voted on 2 additional items that were, so that's 14. So I think we are making the exact steps that we need to do. I don't think we need to make more. We need to see how 14 new laws are changing what's going on. The police are called to every individual and community type emergency. And I absolutely agree that we need additional community responses to support them, but meaning that we should have assistance with homeless and families and these things that are not criminal in nature. We need professionals that are psychologists and can be helpful in that manner, but police are the authority that needs to show up. When you have a problem, you need to have them first so that we can assess it. You don't know what's in someone's mind. You don't know their state of mind when they're being responded to this situation. So it's very important that we find a way for our police to be supported. Go back to constructive engagement of the community and outreach. Give our police a chance to be within the community. Find and promote neighborhood assignments that give them, community allowances to collaboratively work with them and de-escalate. It helps throughout the whole process. So,
thank you, Kenneth. Teresa, please go ahead.
Thank you so much. First of all, those laws don't do anything for Seattle. Seattle already has a higher bar for response. So I want to go back to what has happened here in the city of Seattle. Charlena Lyles was among the names that you mentioned of individuals who have lost their lives at the hands of law enforcement. Charlena Lyles was experiencing a mental health crisis in that moment. Who she needed to show up was a mental health counselor, a case manager, someone to de-escalate the situation, not someone with a gun. She and so many others have lost their lives because we are not deploying the right type of person to calls like that. Mental health providers, case managers, housing connectors are who the vast majority of non-criminal calls need. 80% of the calls that are coming to Seattle Police Department right now are non-criminal in nature. 49% of those calls, according to the mayor and the Seattle Police Department's own data analysis, says that those calls should be transitioned very soon to someone else. And 12% of the calls we receive today, according to that same analysis, should be answered by somebody else besides the Seattle Police Department armed officers. That's why I have helped to scale up investments in the mental health units from our last budget, and we are poised to do more this year, to community service officers as non-armed responses, to community-led interventions such as Choose 180. We've invested $13 million into the Human Services Community Safety Capacity Grants, and we are creating alternatives to 911. A protocol system is being reported back to City Council here very soon so that when you dial 911, the right person who is not armed will show up to calls like that.
Thank you, Teresa. Sarah, please go ahead.
We need a public safety plan for the whole city. And I believe, yes, we do need police reform badly to address the folks that you mentioned in the question. Yes, We can reform the police in a manner that keeps people safe and holds officers accountable and fund accordingly. A lot of what I've heard so far in this conversation is about small crimes, and maybe 50% of the calls that come into the police can be handled by somebody else. I think there's agreement on the fact that officers should not be responding to people in crisis. But I was looking at the data stat here, and just there this year alone, 3,000, almost 4,000 violent crimes, 30,000 property crimes. That's 55% of all crimes. There were also 9,708 arrests of white people. So we have to stop talking about crime as if it's a small thing. Crime is hurting people. And I'm endorsed by Reverend Harriet Walden and Victoria Beach of the African American Community Advisory Council. These are people that have been working in police reform for a long time. They don't want no policing. They don't want 50% reduction in policing. They want better policing. And so do I, because crime is driving people and businesses out of town. This council does not take it seriously. And when we talk about gun violence and people say, get the guns off the street, we need detectives for that. And right now they're being deployed for patrols.
Thank you, Sarah. Nikita.
Thank you so much for this question. We are in a time where our city will do things like cut housing, childcare, food programs, and other essential services, while giving more and more money to a failed system of public safety that does not deliver on its promise of safety for everyone. Charlena Lyles, Tommy Lay, Yosio Falatoga are all examples of how this system does not work. So in 2021, the National Institute for Criminal Justice Reform found from 3 years of 911 dispatch data that 80% of calls are non-criminal responses. And in the future, it would be appropriate for 49%, that's nearly 50% of calls, to receive an alternative non-sworn response. We have this data. We have these experiences, and we have lost many lives. And our continuance of waiting on building a public safety system that is viewed through a public health lens that actually meets the needs of every community member, regardless of how many white folks, according to Sarah's data, have been arrested. We know Black and brown folks are dying, not just at the hands of police, but at the hands of a failed housing system, a failed healthcare system, a failed education system. So when we talk about expanding 911 dispatch and having community-based responses, or having a menu of options to respond when people are in crisis, we're also talking about making big investments in communities to build community health so that we can intervene and prevent harm before it occurs, which police do not do.
Thank you, Nikita. Thank you, everyone, for your responses. I'll now ask our last short answer question. And once again, you'll be given 30 seconds to respond. What do you envision the city's role to be in supporting the sanitation needs of the CID's housed and unhoused residents, including trash pickups, street cleaning, 24-hour public restrooms, and sanitation stations? Teresa, please start.
Thank you very much. The city of Seattle is woefully underperforming in terms of sanitation services for both our residents, our small businesses, for tourists, and for those who are coming here and living unsheltered outside. We all need to be able to have access to restrooms. The World Health Organization has recommended a number of bathrooms per population, and my interest is going to be scaling up public bathrooms and restrooms so that people can wash their hands during a deadly pandemic, can go to the restroom, and can also have showering options.
Thank you. Kenneth.
Can you please repeat the question?
Sure. What do you envision the city's role to be in supporting the sanitation needs of the Chinatown International District's housed and unhoused residents, including trash pickups, street cleaning, 24-hour public restrooms, and sanitation stations?
Yes, I do believe that this is a function of our community value, and this is an item that we should have. Public trash cans and things of that nature. You'll even see the Parks Department for the longest time has picked up every trash can they can, and you'll say, oh, it was stolen, but I go to the tennis courts near Green Lake and you see stacks of them. So it is a community thing. This should be a value that our city should be addressing. And it addresses some of the issues with rats and the challenges we see. All of these are a city issue that we should be highly working toward correcting. So,
Thank you. Nikita.
Yes, so I agree with Teresa that it is the city's responsibility to scale up access to these services and needs. I also would like to add to her comments that the city has centralized all of our homelessness supports in Pioneer Square, downtown Seattle, and Little Saigon, which means many of our community members will congregate in those areas who do not have access to other supports. I think decentralizing those supports and having more navigation centers throughout the entirety of the city will also help increase accessibility and support areas and being able to have be more clean and accessible.
Thank you. Sarah.
Well, the short answer is we need a plan for homelessness. And that is what I heard when I visit the CID, is that trash and encampments, they're not necessarily linked, but these are the complaints that I heard. And so we have got to get a plan. And when I was asked earlier, do I support sweeps? That's a kind of a loaded word. I say that I support helping get people into low barrier housing right away, because encampments are inhumane.
Thank you, Sarah. Now for our final question, prior to the closing question, we will take, this is the one question from the audience, and you have 30 seconds to respond. So the question is, poverty and income inequality have been pervasive issues even before they were exacerbated by the pandemic. The multiple stimulus checks and monthly child tax credits have shown the power of direct cash programs for alleviating poverty. What are your plans for direct investments in our communities? Kenneth, please start us off.
I would be working harder to make home ownership and real asset generation for this this group a realistic plan. Right now, the challenges for all of us is that we're talking about housing becomes unaffordable. When you own your own house, you actually fix that cost for the lifetime if you want, except for taxes, utilities. So it's really important for us to actually change this around and give people a chance to have assets. That could be low-cost loans or subsidized loans. And so that's how I would want to see it.
Thank you. Teresa.
Thank you so much. So as the budget chair and in collaboration with Council President Gonzalez, we worked to pass the Seattle Rescue Plan. In that, we provided $25 million of direct cash assistance to workers in Seattle, because this is an anti-trickle-down mechanism. We want those dollars to go directly into the hands of workers and families. We also made sure that there was funding directly for small businesses in terms of the first relief under COVID relief from the feds. The passage of Jumpstart revenue made it possible for us to do more. And we invested $3 million into child care assistance as an appreciation pay allotment. That's how I think we do bottom up investments in community.
Thank you. Sarah, please go ahead.
Those were federal dollars that council allocated. That is a good thing, yes, but I think that the best way to help people, mitigate the wealth gap is to give opportunity for building generational wealth. Everything from jobs, job training, foreclosure prevention, helping small businesses start and grow. That's where the jobs are, and the city of Seattle can do much more to enable people to start a business, to stay in town, and to prosper.
Thank you. Nikita.
Some really important things. One is to stop means testings as a way for people to gain access to resources, and instead make things like transit free. So you don't have to go access some sort of card and prove that you are poor and need access to it. Direct cash assistance, increasing that. Housing as infrastructure, especially affordable housing. And lastly, treating childcare as infrastructure. It is a necessity for parents. So having it in every neighborhood, ensuring that it is affordable, and providing economic stability specifically for our childcare workers.
Thank you, Nikita. Thank you all so much. We're going to end this portion of the forum with one last closing question, and you'll each be given 30 seconds to respond. What's the first thing you'll do in office to amplify and represent the voices of the Asian and Pacific Islander and Native Hawaiian communities, especially our community members at the margins who are low income, non-citizens, and have limited English proficiency? Teresa, please start.
Thank you. Following the lead and advice from Shara Amlang, who's endorsed me at Hood Famous, I'll invest in small businesses to create more opportunities like she's created in the CID. Following the lead of Velma Valoria and the leaders at the Filipino Community Center, I will continue to invest and scale up senior housing, especially for our AAPI community, and doing more to invest in EDI, which we have not created, which we've added to with Jumpstart. And following the lead of Uncle Frank Aragon and Chief Moy, I will continue to invest in food security and making sure elders get food access.
Thank you. Kenneth, please go
Could you
ahead.
please repeat that one more time?
Sure.
Good question, though.
Yes.
I want to get all the details.
What's the first thing you'll do in office to amplify and represent the voices of the Asian and Pacific Islander and Native Hawaiian communities, especially our community members at the margins who are low income, non-citizens, and have limited English proficiency?
So I feel that this community group is especially damaged by the safety challenges that we're having. It's homelessness isn't always just about dollars. It's also about the other things. So, the mental state, the drugs. So I think that the real thing that we need to do to help this group is that they're getting impacted disproportionately by the unsafe conditions that are available to us. So we need to get a way to build back that police, give them a safety so that we all have a better place to live.
Thank you. Nikita.
So two things first. In 2017, we ran a community listening post in the Chinatown International District with nearly 200 members of the CID. We would like to do that again in partnership with community-based organizations, because you all should determine what our first priorities are. The second thing is make strides on addressing issues with the ISRD. I know that there's lots of development happening in the Chinatown International District that's not actually serving the community or businesses there. And there's not a great way for you all to advocate for the needs of that specific important and historical neighborhood in our city.
Thank you. We deeply appreciate all of our city council candidates. Apologies, everyone, for running slightly over time. We hope you'll stick with us.
Wait,
Sarah didn't get that.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Sarah. Thank you.
usually I like it when I'm not asked a question.
Please close us out. Thank you. My apologies.
All right. Well, I just want to say thank you all for coming. And I think the first thing that I need to do is simply say, I'm here for you. Constituent services is going to be my top priority. I hear a lot about people not getting a response. This is a citywide position. I will represent you. I've heard your concerns on public safety, on homelessness. I will do the right thing. And I do believe that that access to opportunity and more direct communication with your leaders is what's going to make progress on so many of these other issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Appreciate your grace. So now we will transition. Thank you so much for your time and your incredible responses and your hard work. Thank you, everyone, for the city council candidates. We learned so much tonight. Apologies, everybody. We're running slightly over time, just a few minutes. We hope you'll stick with us. We will now transition to our last race for the evening, Seattle's mayoral race. I'm really excited about this. We have both of our mayoral candidates here today, Lorena Gonzalez and Bruce Harrell. We will follow the same format as the rest of the evening, where candidates will give a 1 minute opening statement to introduce themselves and name their top 3 issue areas. Candidates will each then be asked a long answer question with 90 seconds to respond, a short answer question with 30 seconds to respond, and a series of yes or no questions. Overall, the candidates will be asked 3 long answer questions, 3 short answer questions, and 8 yes or no questions. We will once again have the opportunity for 1 audience question, which you can submit via the question tool on Zoom. We will only have time for one audience question that'll be chosen by our team based on what issues we have already covered. We will then end with a quick closing question. Let's start with an opening statement from each candidate where you will be given 1 minute to introduce yourself and speak about your top 3 priority issues as mayor. First, we have Bruce Harrell.
Oh, I was expecting to go second. It's like Lorraine always gets called first.
Please
Well,
start.
thank you. Thank you for this wonderful forum. And by now, you know, I like to show pictures. So I'm going to start off with this picture right here to show you that in 14th, this is in 14th and Yesler. And this whole block of flower shops were owned by my grandparents, my grandmother and grandfather, who were Japanese. And it was taken by the government when they were interned during World War II. And I'll share with you that my mother was actually a political activist. She was doing some work here. She was featured in the facts with this picture and some work she was doing. And I share that with you to say that the kind of mayor that I hope to be is one that comes from a position of natural distrust toward the government, a distrust of power. And when you grow up with that kind of lens, looking at any particular group being discriminated against, you become empowered. And I will be the mayor to protect our community and to empower our community. And so I'll stop there and look forward to the questions.
Thank you, Bruce. Lorena, please share.
Thanks, Amy, for having me. And thanks to all of the organizing folks who brought us together today. So for those of you that I haven't had an opportunity to meet, I'm Lorena Gonzalez. I serve as the current council president. But more importantly, I'm the daughter of immigrants. My parents immigrated here as undocumented immigrants in the late 60s from Michoacan, Mexico. And I grew up in a quintessential experience of only speaking Spanish at home and English outside of the home. When you grow up as a migrant farm worker in central Washington state, you are acutely aware of what it means to grow up in poverty and in circumstances where you are constantly worrying about where your next meal is going to come from. So that's why I'm running to be the next mayor, to address income inequality, to address poverty, which shows up in our community as people who are unhoused and experiencing housing stability, and to, as a former civil rights attorney, take on police accountability to meet the challenge of this moment.
Thank you, Bruce. Thank you, Lorena. And thank you for your opening statements. We will now have our first long answer question, where you will be given 90 seconds to respond. How will you, in coordination with the City Council, address the rise in anti-Asian violence? How will you prioritize the well-being and safety of all communities of color in thinking through solutions to anti-Asian violence? Lorena, we'll start with you.
Great. Well, we know that anti-Asian violence has existed in our community for a very, very long time. And COVID has certainly exacerbated and shone a light on some extreme circumstances of violence, including gun violence, that have taken members of the national Asian community away from their families and away from our nation. And so the next mayor has the responsibility to use the bully pulpit in a way that makes sure that members of our community feel that they continue to be welcomed and that they will continue to be protected. And my vision for protection, unlike my opponent, who focuses a lot on just hiring more police and putting more boots in communities to police community, I believe that it's really important to invest in those programs of wellness and resilience, particularly for our elders, and to also make sure that we are building our community-based organization infrastructure that will produce lasting effects around creating a stronger network of social cohesion in our communities, whether it's through housing stability, through having cleaner communities, through having better lighting and creating a built environment, but more importantly, investing in our community-based organizations who are in the best position to caretake for our elders and our children who are targeted by anti-Asian violence.
Thank you. Bruce, please share.
Thank you very much. I generally like to describe my own approach as opposed to my opponent's approach. And so having said that, I will like to increase a police presence, but let me redefine what I mean by that. That yes, more officers, but more importantly, more public safety officers, perhaps unarmed in many situations, coming from the communities that they serve. Our recruiting strategy will come from our own communities, and we'll have a certified program where they will be masters of de-escalation, masters at mediation, but most importantly, culturally competent, coming from our communities to protect and serve. Number one. Number two, at the root of this anger, or at the root of this hatred toward Asians, and I don't have to tell you all about it, I've experienced it myself. At the root of that is ignorance. And so through our educational opportunities, evangelizing the greatness of our community, letting people know we are not responsible for COVID. Again, this is not new. If you look at even the Executive Order 9066, the Chinese Exclusion Act. So people are becoming aware of what we've been experiencing for decades and decades. So this is not new. So we have to speak loudly. We have to articulate the issues in the beauty of the Asian culture. Number two, that is the speaking out piece. And number three, the root causes of this anger are still the aftershocks of the Trump administration and the white supremacy movement. So we will do, with the right resource, do more investigative work to look at the white supremacy organizations that are largely behind a lot of this violence, perpetuating it through social media. So we'll have an aggressive plan to get at the root of it.
Thank you. Thank you, Bruce. Thank you, Lorena. Now we will have our first short answer where you will be given 30 seconds to respond. How do you plan to address the needs of BIPOC-owned small businesses in Seattle, and specifically businesses with limited English and digital proficiency, to be able to access resources they need to prosper during and as we emerge from the ongoing pandemic? Bruce, please go ahead.
Sure. So I've toured just about every business district, small business district. I've been doing this work for 30 years. The first thing we'll do is meet them where they are and find out their problems. Access to capital. So we'll make sure the capital using community block grant organizations or community development financial institutions or large corporations that have pools. We'll make sure the University of Washington Business Development Center, for example, will help with strategic plans and social media. We'll make sure that the premises, this is a tough question, 30 seconds, by the way, make sure the premises are safe, and we'll make sure our Seattle Job Center gives them access to people.
Thank you. You did it.
Well, I had more to say, but I had to give the abbreviated version.
Lorena.
You know, I think at the end of the day, it comes down to money. There's a lot of money flowing into our community, from the Jumpstart payroll tax to federal dollars. And the next mayor has to understand that when we are talking about direct cash assistance, that direct cash assistance needs to go to those who are furthest away from recovery in this moment in time. And that's why I'm proud to be supported by many small business owners, including BIPOC in the BIPOC community, because they know when I get to City Hall, I'm going to focus on their needs, not on large corporation needs, not on the special interests and the wealthy interests in our city, which has been traditionally done.
Thank you both. I will now ask 4 yes or no questions. I will ask each question and then ask each of you to get yes, no, or pass. Please keep your answer to only yes, no, or pass. First question. Do you support moving the city towards free public transit during your term if elected? Bruce.
Yes.
Lorena.
Yes.
Question 2. Seattle's domestic workers, like house cleaners and nannies, are overwhelmingly women, majority BIPOC and immigrants, and earn low wages. Recent surveys in Seattle show nearly 60% of domestic workers, including 80% of house cleaners, do not get any form of paid time off, including Seattle paid sick time. Domestic workers in Seattle have proposed a solution to this policy gap of a portable benefits policy. Under this policy, workers would receive paid time off from each employer they work for as they move from job to job. Would you support a portable benefits policy for domestic workers? Lorena.
Yes, already at work at it.
Bruce.
Yes.
Question 3. Do you support reducing the Seattle Police Department's budget and redirecting law enforcement funding to social services and community programs? Bruce?
Well, I don't like the way that question is framed, so I'll say pass, because I may increase the funding, but I certainly may
Thank you,
increase the
Bruce.
funding. Well, it's a loaded question, so I don't like being trapped in a question like that. So I'll just pass on that one.
Thank you. Lorena?
Yes.
Fourth question. Beacon Hill is one of Seattle's most diverse neighborhoods, and residents are majority from communities of color. Aircraft from SeaTac fly over Beacon Hill every 90 to 180 seconds, emitting harmful air and noise pollution. Do you plan to hold SeaTac Airport accountable for the harmful health, environment, and climate impacts on Beacon Hill residents and its neighbors? Lorena?
Yes.
Bruce?
Yes.
Thank you to both of you. Now we will move on to our second long answer question, where you will again be given 90 seconds each to respond. With over 5,500 people in Seattle, that's 5,500 people in Seattle, living without stable housing, how do you plan to address homelessness and support our city's unsheltered community? We'll start with Bruce.
Sure. So every means necessary is, I guess, the short answer. So what we'll do, number one, is we will move people out of parks and sidewalks into transitional housing to the extent they could have water and heat. We have to make sure that they are safe, number one. An individualized case management approach, housing first, a policy that I support. We will also use every conceivable way to use our progressive tax structure, overcoming our regressive tax structure, to find as much revenue as humanly possible to implement the 65 recommendations from the housing affordability and livability work. And that includes incentive zoning and commercial linkage fees and removing barriers to people who've committed crimes, et cetera. What I think differs from my approach, in addition to making sure these wealthy corporations pay their fair share of taxes, is I will tap in heavily to the philanthropic community as well and raise hundreds of millions of dollars to make sure, again, that not only do we build transitional housing, but we build workforce housing and 40, 60, 80% of area median income as well. So we have a fairly well-rounded approach to all of our housing stock. We will embrace density all around the city where it makes sense, around transit lines and transit-oriented development, and work with neighborhoods to find out where and density makes sense, because we have hundreds of thousands of units of zoning capacity we are not using.
Thank you. Lorena?
I'm a little surprised by the response I just heard. That's very inconsistent with some of the comments that I've heard my opponent make in other settings and forums.
Sure.
I am really, I'm really committed to make sure that we are rapidly and quickly scaling up the shelter that we need to actually get people out of our parks, as opposed to sweeping them out of our parks into our neighborhoods, which is the plan that has been adopted by my opponent, because it's a carbon copy of Compassion Seattle Charter Amendment 29, which was fundamentally about being able to sweep people across the city. That's not a solution. A solution is actually working with our housing and shelter service providers, scaling up culturally, linguistically available services, including shelter, rapidly setting those up by using the powers under the emergency order and getting people immediately out of tents and into those safe and appropriate places where they can begin to receive the services, whether it's mental health, behavioral health, or substance use disorder treatment right away. I will also focus on family reunification for those individuals who express an interest in being reunified with their families, whether it's in Seattle or anywhere else. And I believe that instead of punting progressive revenue to the state, we here in the city of Seattle need to continue to put progressive revenue at the front of our own agenda to fund these important services.
Great, thank you. So next, we will have our second short answer question with 30 seconds to respond. What programs would you create or support to generate progressive revenue for our city? Lorena, please start.
I think, I was one of the co-sponsors for Jumpstart Payroll Tax and Progressive Revenue right here in the city, not punting to the state or to the feds, but right here in the city. I think there'll be an opportunity in future years to look at how we can scale that progressive revenue up that does focus on taxing our largest and wealthiest corporations. I agree with some of the answers in the previous panel around looking at a CEO tax. And also we have a capital gains tax opportunity. If it survives the challenge, we can build on that capital gains tax here in Seattle and generate new progressive revenue for the needs we're discussing.
Thank you. Bruce.
Sure. And for the record, I've been in office for 12 years and lived in this city for decades. I'm very consistent on my messaging at all forums and in my legislative career. So to answer your question directly, I certainly support a capital gains tax. I support the Jumpstart tax that was recently enacted. I support a state income tax, and you'll see the members of 65 elected or current officials who've elected me in the state legislature around support me as well. We're already having discussions about what that can look like, because we know that we have this very regressive tax system here in our state.
Thank you. I will now ask a second round of 4 yes or no questions. I will once again ask each question and then get a yes, no, or pass from each of you. First question. The Equitable Development Initiative, EDI, is a program created by the City of Seattle in response to the inequitable growth, displacement, and distribution of opportunities the city's marginalized residents have experienced. EDI focuses on supporting community organizations to build buildings that help promote equitable access to housing, cultural expression, healthy food, and amenities. The fund started out with $16 million in 2016 and is currently expecting slightly under $20 million a year under the Jumpstart proposal. Do you support significantly increasing funding to the EDI, the Equitable Development Initiative? Bruce.
Yes.
Lorena.
Yes.
Question 2. Do you support clearing encampments in public spaces, also known as sweeping? Lorena.
No.
Bruce.
Yes. Into housing.
Question 3. It is critical to the safety and livelihood of sex workers for governments and nonprofits to dissect the conflation of human trafficking, in which there is a perpetrator and victim, and sex work, in which both adults consent to the service. Do you support the decriminalization of sex work? Bruce.
Yes.
Lorena.
Yes.
Question 4. Are you in support of the city investing in more 24-hour and regularly maintained public restrooms? Lorena.
Yes.
Bruce.
Yes.
Thank you. Now we'll move on to our last long answer question with 90 seconds to respond. Given police killings in recent years of Charlena Lyles, Tommy Lay, Manuel Ellis, Iosia Felatogo, and many others, as well as the city's struggle to fulfill the requirements of the federal consent decree, how do you plan to address issues of police violence, use of lethal force, and need for accountability? Lorena, we'll start with you.
Great. So, I was a civil rights attorney for 10 years before moving into public service. And as part of that work, I represented families across the state, including here in the city of Seattle, in a variety of police brutality and racial bias policing cases. It's part of what motivated me to run for office in the first place. So as the next mayor, I think there are a few key things. One is we need to continue to reduce our heavy reliance on law enforcement to be the solution to all issues of public safety in our community by standing up alternatives of law enforcement and investing in our community-based safety programming that will do more to keep our communities safe. Second, the next mayor has the opportunity to take on SPOG and to negotiate a contract that will stay true to the police accountability ordinance that we passed in 2017 and that I had an opportunity to work on with community. And then the last thing is we need to make sure that we are rooting out officers at the hiring stage and those who are already in the department who have any affinity for white nationalism sentiments to make sure that we can rebuild our culture back in terms of a responsible agency who is actually going to continue to provide public safety services without killing our community members.
Thank you, Lorena. Bruce.
Yeah, so first thing we will ask is who should respond to Charlene Lyles as an example. And we do not need a gun and badge there when we knew her history of mental illness and the fact that she called the police for her own protection. So we will not have a gun and badge there, go there. And that's why I talk about this new kind of public safety officer that comes from our communities, accompanied by a mental health counselor, a person who is skilled at dealing with people in a mental crisis. You know, I'm proud to be endorsed by the firefighters because I think they master what good first responders look like and how they treat people regardless as to their demographic, number one. But number two, we have to go further than that. We have to look at where should we take someone in a Charlene Lyles situation. We do not want to take them to jail. We do not want to take them to Harborview. They may be checked out. We need to take them to a center by which they get individualized case management and follow-up services. They get to be treated. So in our approach, that's why we will be looking at a new person who comes there, but we'll also be looking at the safe harbor for that person to be taken to, such that their needs are met, their children are safe. Number three, you may recall I was the first proponent of body cameras. And that was a tough argument I'd have made. I was at Kane Hall debating the ACLU, and I was out in different businesses talking about that, because in every situation, we need to know what happened. And in that unfortunate situation, the cameras were off. So you're going to see us re-exploring the use of body cameras to make sure that we learn from every single incident to become a better city.
Thank you. Thank you, Bruce. Thank you, Lorena. I'll now ask our last short answer question. And once again, you'll be given 30 seconds to respond. How do you envision the city's role to be in supporting the sanitation needs of the Chinatown International District's housed and unhoused residents, including trash pickups, street cleaning, 24-hour public restrooms, and sanitation stations? Bruce, please start us off.
Sure. Now, you may recall when I was mayor for 5 days that I issued an executive order, and I said in plain terms, this city is just filthy. It's just dirty, that between the graffiti and all of the litter. And so I issued an executive order to require the cleanups. The Chinatown International District is certainly no exception. So you'll see us doubling down on our SPU efforts. They have a sense of urgency. And again, I think the inadequacy coming out of City Hall right now speaks volumes, but you'll see an urgency of cleanup activity under the Harrell administration.
Thank you. Lorena.
Yeah, I think that we can always do better in terms of our sanitation services and really scale up those services that are being provided across the community and target them to areas that really have been underserved and historically underserved in terms of basic sanitation services. So I would be very interested in pulling together a plan that would do just that. In addition, making sure that we're actually investing in brick and mortar buildings to create safe, available, accessible public restrooms across the city.
Thank you. Okay, now we have the question from the audience where you will each have 30 seconds to respond. Islamophobia and hate crimes are on the rise, with 2 mosques attacked recently. How will you address this? Lorena, please.
Yeah, I mean, I think the answer for me is always about creating, resilience within our community. Some people and some mayors may want to go in the direction of starting to criminalize other communities or to criminalize the community generally as a response to how we prevent this hate. And I really think that it's important for us to double down, triple down on our investments in community-based organizations that are really, again, in the best position to deploy those programs that are going to be necessary to keep our communities safe.
Thank you. Bruce.
So the common denominator in anti-Asian hate in the what's happening in our mosques and our Islamic faith, what African Americans and others have faced is anger and hatred and ignorance. So we're going to put structure around certain commissions to openly talk about this. You're going to see an intermingling, if you will, of faiths and cultures and churches and faith-based community and leaders. And we're going to all talk about the strategies and the investment strategies and the opportunities to build community to make sure that we all have safeguards against this ignorance.
Thank you, Bruce. Thank you, Lorena. So we're going to end this portion of the forum with one last closing question. We're almost there. Thank you so much to both of you. And you will each be given 30 seconds to respond. What's the first thing you'll do in office to amplify and represent the voices of the Asian and Pacific Islander and Native Hawaiian communities, especially our community members at the margins who are low income, non-citizens, and have limited English proficiency? Bruce, please start.
Sure. Well, I showed you this picture, and I showed you that picture as one of many pictures I've shown during this campaign to say that I'm part of the community. And what we will do is we will have a meeting with our ethnic media to start off with, because whatever I do is sustainable. It has to be sustainable. So we're going to find out the best way to communicate to all of our cultures. We have different languages, different backgrounds, different ways by which we communicate to one another. So one of the first steps we will take is working with the media to make sure we have a communication stream to empower our community.
Thank you, Bruce. Lorena.
As the daughter of immigrants, I understand what the immigrant experience is, and I understand what it means to not have English proficiency, or to be your auntie or your grandma or your uncle's translator and interpreter all the time. So the city has a responsibility to make sure that we are delivering linguistically competent and culturally available services. And we have to invest in the infrastructure that is going to keep the API community safe. That's housing and other services to make sure that we're building resilience.
Thank you so much, Lorena. Thank you, Bruce. It's been wonderful to hear from you, both of your platforms and ideas. And we're grateful for everyone with the city council races and the executive races. We have finished our evening. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. And we'll make the recording available for anyone that's missed today's event. Lastly, a reminder that the general election is on November 2nd. You should have already received your ballot, and you can vote anytime between now and Election Day. If you need help filling out the ballot, you can always call or email our Asian Counseling Referral Service organizers. We're also currently looking for volunteers for our phone bank to get out the vote to the Asians and Pacific Islanders living in Seattle. You can sign up at the link in the chat. And once again, we all are thankful to all our candidates for being here and the incredible work that you all do every day. And thank you to our amazing partners for organizing this event. We won't keep you any longer. Have a good evening, enjoy your dinner, and take care, everyone. Be well.
Nice job, Amy.
Thank you. Thank you, Lorena. Thank you, Bruce. Have a good night, everyone. Good night.